Today's story is about a man called Gideon. This is Gideon. Now, do you remember there was a man called Joshua who led all of God's people into the promised land, into Israel? Now, these people who are called the Israelites, and Gideon was an Israelite, had started to forget about God. They soon forgot all of God's rules, and they were far apart from God and not feeling close to him. And they were showing lots of broken love. And they didn't really care to start with, because they were quite happy doing their own things and not worrying about having to please God, until there were some enemies that came to threaten them to take over their land. These were called the Midianites. Now, the Midianites had set up camp, and they had a plan to take over all of the land of Israel and have it for their own. They started off by doing things to the Israelites like stealing their animals. So they would take their animals for their own and leave the Israelites without any animals. And then they would take their crops from them as well, and they'd steal them in the night when nobody was looking. And so the Israelites were getting really, really worried about their land being taken over. And this went on for 7 whole years. Soon the Israelites began to want God again. They wanted God's help and to be close to him. Now, there was one young man, and he was called Gideon, and he was a man that did remember all of God's laws, all of his rules, and he loved God very much, and he showed love to God. One day, a stranger came to see Gideon, and he told Gideon that God was going to help him to get rid of the Midianites. Wow, how was God going to do that? Now, Gideon wasn't quite so sure. He didn't feel very brave, and he wanted to be sure that God was actually telling him that he was going to help him to do this. So Gideon spoke with God, and he said, God, when I go to sleep at night, I would like you to make the ground on the floor wet and the fleece that I lay out dry. Then I will know that you are God, and that what you have told me is the truth. Because at night time you get like a dew on the ground that makes everything wet. So really it would be impossible for the ground to be wet and the fleece to be dry. So Gideon knew that if God did this, that really God's superpower was doing an amazing thing, and he could trust that God was really telling him to do this. So as Gideon slept that night, an amazing thing happened. The ground became wet. On the ground, it was wet, but the fleece stayed dry. Next morning, Gideon woke up and he touched the ground, and he could feel that it was wet, just as he had asked God to do. But Gideon still wasn't sure, so he spoke to God again, and he said, God, I really want to trust you, but can you please do what I've asked you to do again, but the other way round? And so this time, Gideon put out on the ground, he put out some fleece. And as he went to sleep, he said to God, God, I would like you to make the fleece wet and the ground dry. And so Gideon went to sleep. And that night, God's superpower came and made the fleece all wet, but kept the ground dry. So Gideon woke up in the morning and he checked the ground. The ground was dry, but the fleece was wet, just as he had asked God to do. So now Gideon knew that God really was telling him the truth, that he was speaking to him, and that he was going to do a special job to get rid of the Midianite army. Now, although Gideon knew that he could trust God, he still wasn't sure. One night, Gideon overheard one of the soldiers in the Midianite camp talking. And this is what the soldier said. He was talking to his friends and he said, I had a dream that Gideon and his army came and beat us and fought us and made us go away. Now, Gideon knew. He knew that this army had started to get worried. He knew that he actually might be able to fight them and they might go away because God had told him, and this Midianite had a dream. And so Gideon gathered his army. Now, lots of the Israelite people didn't want to help. And so Gideon said to them, I only want those people that want to come and fight with me. Eventually, there was just a very small army of people that were willing to fight with Gideon. And you know, Gideon didn't want them to have swords and fight with weapons. Gideon gave each person a torchlight. But to start with, the torchlight must be hidden underneath a jar. So everybody was given a torch, and that was going to be something that they would use as they went into the camp. And here's Gideon's one. So they all had this and they were hidden underneath the little jar that Gideon had given to them. And another thing that Gideon gave to each of them was a horn. And this horn was going to be something that they could blow and make a big noise with. And so they each carried their horns as well. And you know, when it was time to go into the camp, they didn't charge, they didn't rush and hurry. Just as the little army that they were, they walked into the army all the way in, and all they had to do was to uncover their torches, just like that. And do you know what the Midianites did? They realised that the soldier's dream was true and that all of a sudden the Israelites had come to take over. There was a big bright light that filled the sky with the bright torches, and there was a big loud noise as everybody blew their trumpets. And the Midianites, they did not hang around. They ran away as quickly as they could. Wow. God's superpower had been with all of the Israelites, with Gideon and his very small army, and he gave them back the land. Because God, when he makes a promise, always keeps it. I wonder what promises God has made that you can remember today.